Had the chance earlier to visit with UFC MMA legend Randy Couture. Really good dude. Here's our conversation from earlier. Randy, thanks. I'm a huge fan. So this is super cool. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
So as I just said, you're one of the legends of the sport. You're a multi-time champion. You're one of the guys that really defined the rise of MMA, UFC, and beyond. When you look out at the sport as a fan, as an expert, how do you feel about the way that it's evolved, the way that it's grown since you got started?
Well, certainly as a fighter and watching the fighters, I think it's come a long way. It's evolved a lot, and tactically and technically, the level of athlete and the level of fighting that's going on now is a lot different than when I started back in '97. That being said, I think there's also been some growing pains in the sport. Now that it's become the combative sport for this generation, it's on almost every single weekend. You can tune in somewhere and find MMA. I think we as fighters need to get a little more organized, recognize that we are the product here, and that without us there are no shows, and maybe get a fairer shot at what's going on, the revenue and all the things that are happening in the sport right now. Take care of ourselves with 501c3s or not 501c3s, but 401ks. So with their retirement, health benefits, some of those things that a lot of the other professional athletes in our society enjoy, we're not getting any of that right now. So, and that I think is on us as fighters.
Yeah, there's no argument that the sport doesn't make a lot of money. Look no further than UFC's sale a few years ago. It's a B as in billions, not an M as in millions in terms of what, and obviously it's a dominant company, but that's just one MMA company. How do fighters do that, Randy? Because obviously, whether it's Dana White or the next guy, when people have a stranglehold on the finances of something that works, they're not usually going to turn into charity and say, here, why don't you take a big chunk of this? How do fighters actually get that done?
Well, I'm part of the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association and educating fighters about the need for the Fighters Association, getting us all to come together, especially those guys that are active now. It's one thing for me as a retired athlete to be involved, but all the active fighters, the top guys right now, are the guys that really have the most influence. If we can get them involved and see the wisdom in forming the Fighters Association, creating an entity not unlike SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. I mean, if you look at all the different studios that are all promoting and making films, all drawing from a pool of talent, that's the most similar thing to what we're doing in fighting. We have a bunch of promotions that are all wanting to put on fights. There's a pool of athletes that they're pulling from. If we come together and get organized, then we can at least develop some minimum criteria, some minimum pay standards, get some retirement and health care in place. And a lot of those things that, like the NFLPA, the Players Association, Major League Baseball, basketball, they all have players associations. And that's what the Fighters Association is all about.
I mean, I get you. In my radio world, I'm a part of SAG-AFTRA, and obviously UFC is the dominant force, but not the only force. And the more we see MMA leagues, associations, enterprises that work, maybe the easier this is going to be. In terms of the Professional Fighters League, and it's interesting because it's a different format. It's really structured around what we've come to know as a regular season, right? A regular season, a playoffs, a championship. Can you tell us about that and where you hope and where you think that's going?
Well, I think that's the one thing that distinguishes the PFL from every other organization out there that's putting on MMA fights. This format, having a regular season, 6 weight classes, 12 athletes in each weight class, all going out and doing their best to score, to make enough points and finish those fights in distinct fashion so that they get the nod and are in the top 8 to move to the playoffs. In the playoffs, they're going to fight the quarterfinals and the semifinals in the same night. That's a tall order. That's what we used to do in the early days. It was a tournament back then. So just like the NHL going on right now for the Stanley Cup, it's about progressing. Guys can talk all they want, but they still have to go out there and win fights and do it in a dynamic fashion if they're going to get a shot at that $1 million in the finals.
Randy, we know heavyweights can fight generally longer than guys that are in the sport that are a little bit smaller. But 40s is 40s. If memory serves, you won the heavyweight championship at age 43. Anderson Silva is still fighting at age 44. Can you just give us a sense at that age, at that weight class, the advantages and the struggles to try to be competitive?
Well, I think the science of athletics has come a long ways. You're seeing that across the board in a lot of different sports, not just fighting. I was certainly fortunate not to sustain any serious injuries that hampered me from keeping my fitness level high and competing at a high level well into my 40s. I fought till I was 47. I think you're seeing guys in other sports do the same thing. We're getting smarter about what we put in our bodies, how we take care of these machines that we're trying to run and compete at that high level. So that's what that's all about. Anderson's certainly doing a good job of that and taking care of himself. But you know, I feel fortunate to have been able to do what I did.
Whether it's Michael Jordan or Willie Mays back in the day or Chuck Liddell, it's hard for guys that compete their whole lives and don't listen to the doubters to move on when the time is right. Do you miss fighting, or when it was finally over for you, was that transition easy?
I feel very fortunate that I had acting and the other business entities that I developed in my time as a fighter to fall back on, to focus on as my new purpose, getting acting jobs. I think that lack of purpose, you know, whether it's a soldier, a fighter, or an athlete, a football player, that's your sole purpose and identity. It's very wrapped up in that endeavor. It's hard to just walk away from that. It's a very personal thing. So having something else to focus on, a new purpose that will occupy your time, your competitive juices, whatever it is, that's very important. And I feel fortunate that I had those things as I transitioned both as a pro athlete and then as a wrestler as well.
At UFC 237, Rose Namajunas is going to her second title defense, and she'll be headlining that card. How important do you think women's MMA is to UFC's future, just to the future of the sport broadly?
Well, my perspective there is it comes from wrestling, and women were striving for a long time to be a full medal Olympic sport. Now there's a huge collegiate movement in women's athletics for wrestling. I think having a female counterpart to our sport is very, very important. You look at the application of Title IX over the years since the 80s, since it was founded, it's decimated collegiate sports in the men's world. Men's swimming is all about gone. Men's gymnastics, certainly men's wrestling has taken a shot. Programs are dropped all over to be in compliance with Title IX. So having wrestling programs in the women's world and in the men's world helps take that pressure off. And I think that same thing translates to mixed martial arts. Obviously, women's boxing has been around quite a while, and there's a lot of great boxers. You look what Holly Holm did as a world-class boxer stepping into MMA. So I think having that female counterpart is something we need to embrace, and it's something that's really, really good for us as a male sport.
Yeah, it's really interesting. At UFC 239, Santos is going to fight John Jones in that light heavyweight division. Is anyone a real challenger at this stage to John Jones?
Well, I think John's a tall order for anybody right now. Talent-wise, there's nobody better. Obviously, he's had some other issues, kind of keeping things straight outside of the cage. But when he walks up in that cage, there's nobody more talented than he is right now.
Do you think we'll eventually get a Cormier John Jones trilogy fight? Do you expect to see those two guys in an octagon or again? So much history.
I don't know. The real question is, will Jones go up to heavyweight for that, or will Cormier come back down to light heavyweight? I think Daniel's pretty happy being a heavyweight, frankly. So the real question is whether Jones wants to come up there and play around with the big guys.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you know what? DC's probably earned the right to be patient, to say the least. I know this is a year old, but my family, we all just went to the Avengers movie, so Chris Pratt's on the brain, and we the old Instagram of you guys, and you guys have some history back in the day. So okay, so actors, and you're an actor and an MMA guy, and a legend as an MMA guy. Sometimes actors act like they're tough because they're actors, but the word is, Jake Laser says that Pratt punches harder than you, which I find hard to believe. Is Pratt legit?
Laser,
I mean, really?
Well, Laser's going to find any way to poke at me and have fun with me. So Pratt is the first guy to tell you he's not a tough guy, but he's also a very, very good wrestler. All his wrestling skills and that wrestler's mindset is what made him who he is. He embraces that as part of the foundation of who he is. And He's still a very good wrestler. I enjoy working out with him. It's fun to have another wrestler to pummel with and to work with and drill with, and Chris is all that. He's very, very good, very talented athlete.
Yeah, that brings me to my last question. I was struck by it. He talked about the fact that base taught him to be a grinder and what he chose to do for a living. For those of us, and I once tried in Davenport, Iowa, at Pat Milicich's gym. I once tried to do MMA for real, and then I thought, I'm just going to talk about this and write about this for a living. But it is like boxing, wrestling, MMA, even casually it's a really interesting way just to get in shape. For the non-professional athlete, are there some life lessons that you can pull from this sport?
Absolutely. I think anytime you mentioned Chris mentioning embracing the grind, this style, this individual combative sport, whether it's wrestling, Muay Thai, kickboxing, any form of grappling, there's a grind to that. It's physically demanding. It's mentally demanding. You're literally playing kinetic chess. And so I think there are life lessons. You're going to lose. You're going to get beat up on occasion. You got to pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and get back to doing what you do best and figuring out how to do it better. And that's life. So I think that's why that sport's important.
Randy, enjoyed the conversation. Congrats on all your post-fighting success, the Professional Fighters League included. Really appreciate your time. We'd love to do it again sometime.
I appreciate you having us on.